Hi, my name is Angela Skibberis and I am the kinesiologist. I'm a kinesiologist of over 18 years and I am on a journey to connect with and speak with and interview as many incredible kinesiologists as I possibly can over the next year or two. And this particular kinesiologist that I'm really privileged to be speaking with today is a dear friend and someone that I've got an incredible amount of respect for. She has a whopping amount of years of experience and dedicated a lot of her life to the health and well-being of other people through kinesiology and other, sort of dovetailing types of therapies that she'll discuss with us today. So I'm actually going to read Judy's bio. I'm going to be looking down and being very rude. I'm going to read Judy's bio for you all so that you can get a sense of who this incredible woman is. So Judy moved to Sydney in the early 1900s. 1900s. How old are you, Judy? You must be like in the early 1990s. That's hilarious. I think you look great for your age, by the way. If you were born in the 1900s. She started working in corporate for several years and stayed there until the birth of her third daughter. Although the girls had a full life and were kept busy, Judy noticed that there were some patterns coming out in her girls that showed some behavioural challenges. These seemed to be just, normal naughtiness that a lot of us might see. However, the behaviours seemed to be sort of be coming out of the girls' control. When Judy was referred to go to a kinesiologist, Bernard Carsen, is that how he...
Bernard Carsen, yeah.
Bernard. A lot of people know Bernard. A lot of kinesiologists know of Bernard. He's been, in our field for a very, very long time, extremely experienced and well loved. So, to be seeing Bernard and also to know him as well as you will share with us that you do, it's wonderful. So she saw Bernard and noticed that the behaviours had settled. So Judy had planned to go back to the corporate world, though she started investigating how to study kinesiology. Judy decided to study kinesiology, but was determined to study neural organisation technique. And being that there were limited places to study, she decided to stick with Bernard Carsen and study with him. After all, he was the best and still is one of the best, I would argue. So there was other techniques that she also studied. However, her primary modality is N.O.T, which she'll explain to us, I'm sure. One of the other courses that she went to was primitive reflexes. She completed this study and was accredited in it, and then given the opportunity to study retained neonatal reflexes with Keith Keen. Is that correct? Did I say that right? Retained
retained their neonatal reflexes with Keith Keen.
Judy has now successfully combined her learning and works with a lot of children who are behaviourally challenged or their learning has been impacted by these reflexes. So combining the reflexes with N.O.T has seen significant changes in the people she works with. She works with all ages, as adults can also be impacted by these reflexes. If you have a behaviourally challenged or learning difficulty, or even if things are just harder than they really should be, there could be something interesting here for you today to learn about, or even to see Judy Weaver as a client. So thank you so much for coming on and chatting with us today, Judy. You've had a really full-on few weeks and been very, very busy. And sadly, you have just lost your beloved cat, which I know for all those people listening today who have pets would understand that deep loss, and I'm really sorry to hear that. So for anyone watching today, Jude and I might get a bit emotional because it's we're real here, because guess what, we're kinesiologists and we're human. And we feel deeply for obviously others and our little beloved furry ones. So I'm sorry to hear that. And just so Jude's, just so you all know, she's really came on today, and I appreciate that, considering all that you've been going through the last week or so. But thank you for coming on. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about Jude. So how many years have you been working as a kinesiologist now?
I was actually just trying to think of that. It would be 20 years.
20 years, which is extraordinary and gives you the opportunity to be known as a specialist and someone who's extensive experience in your field, in this wonderful field that we love, kinesiology. And share with us, how did you come to know? I mean, it's one of those things that people say, what is that? And how did you come to even experience it for the first time?
Okay, so I should have experienced it sooner. I think the universe was trying to bring me into it many years beforehand, but I ignored that. But my middle daughter had some learning difficulties. Her reading was terrible. It was just, we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. And I ended up going to a place called the Davis program, which was a dyslexia program.
Mm-hmm.
And through the course of that, the lady that I was working with said, I think there's something wrong with her tracking. She said, Can you go and see Bernard Carsen? So I went, oh, okay. So I went out there. I drove out to Eastwood, saw Bernard Carsen there, thought, my goodness, what have I brought my daughter to? I came home, rang my husband, said, I think I've just taken our daughter to a witch doctor. But the changes were significant. So I walked into his room with a child that struggled to focus, struggled to have a conversation while she was doing anything else. She had to have all of her focus on that. She got in the car with me on the way home and got her Game Boy out and got up to a level that she'd never had gotten up to before and had a conversation with me while she was doing it. And I went, oh, that's different. So we came home and I sort of pushed it all to the side and I said, look, I just took her there just at the right time. Obviously, it was going to happen for her and it was just a coincidence. But while Bernard was working with her, she said to him, if I lie down and watch the TV, I see two TVs. And 3 months later, she came up to me and she said, Mum, you know how we went to that man? And I went, yes. And she said, and I told him that if I lie down and watch the TV, I see two TVs. And I said, yes. She said, well, it went, but it's starting to come back again a bit. So that's when I rebooked with Bernard, went out and saw him, had another session with him, and got, again, really good results. It was a good learning curve for me because it sort of shows me that different things can come into your world and actually cause imbalances to come in. So just because something is corrected doesn't mean it's going to stay like that forever if you keep doing what you've been doing. So I'm very, very strong on nutrition within my kinesiology. I've done all the nutrition courses as well because I believe that with behavioural difficulties in particular, you have to get rid of the MSGs and the nasties out of their food. And, there's a bit of a trick to doing all of that, but yeah, we can go into that at another time. But the big thing that came through for me was I then said to Bernard, I want to learn what you're doing. And he laughed at me and said, well, you've got to go and do anatomy and physiology. You've got to go and do this. You've got to do that. Because no one had an N.O.T course running at their school. So I had to do it through Bernard. I had to go to Meadowbank TAFE and do anatomy and physiology. I did go and do a brain gym course, which wasn't really what I was looking for. And then I studied with Bernard for the next several years. My daughter was my guinea pig and with a lot of work at home. And she came along in leaps and bounds to the point where the teachers would come up to me and say, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And one of the teachers actually came out to my house to say, what do you do? Because I'm fascinated at the changes in her and how she was going ahead. So she came out and she had a look at it and she said, wow, this is amazing. What I did find, though, was my daughter was still a little bit badly behaved. Her learning was getting better. She was doing all of those things. And so when a primitive reflexes course came up that Bernard and Shana Sangster were teaching, I went and did it. And there's a few people that have written books on it and stuff like that. So I studied it. And I've had all sorts of results from it. I had one family that was coming to me, her 2 daughters, one daughter in particular. She sent me a whole heap of clients afterwards, and they sort of said to me, "You don't realise what you've done for that family, Judy." And I said, "Tell me more." And she said,
Yes.
"No one used to actually invite that family to anything because of that child, and now they get to go everywhere." And I went, "Oh, okay,
Wow.
that's great." So she wrote me a letter, and I've got some letters here and stuff like that. I did actually, when I was first learning kinesiology, I had only done touch for health at that stage. I came home and practiced on my older daughter who had a sweating problem, and she was supposed to go out that night, and I balanced her body to sweating and all the sweat glands and all that sort of stuff. And she proceeded to then sit on the toilet for 4 hours and couldn't go out that night. She wasn't impressed, but she stopped sweating. So, but with the primitive reflexes, it is a bit of a baby of mine. I've got a lot of people wanting me to teach them because I did have the privilege of learning not only with Bernard but with Keith Keane. Keith Keane did pass away last year, and he typically didn't allow kinesiologists to go and do his course. It was only applied kinesiologists. But he allowed me to go and do it, and it was quite well, it was different. It gave me a new foresight into a few other things, but it also gave me a more balanced way to complete my work with the primitive reflexes, because the thing that I had found with the primitive reflexes is people would go and get them integrated with a specialist, and they would hold for a short time and they'd come back again. So I was determined to not only get them to hold, but to keep them holding. And they typically will hold. I will say that if you have an incident or a trauma that comes into the body, they can come back a little bit, and then you may need another session just to reintegrate them. But typically they do hold once you get them. They can be difficult, they can be tough. Some people it takes one session, other people it takes a lot more. So it depends on how many layers there are to it. I don't know if you've heard much about the primitive reflexes, Angela.
Yes, well, I do use them a little bit in clinic. From time to time they come up. Obviously, you've got things like the Moro reflex and the early uterine reflexes and many others that are involved in, and set up very early in life. Fight or flight type reflexes, I suppose, is a simplistic way of explaining it. But would you mind explaining to people what, number one, in a nutshell, what N.O.T, what specifically that was in kinesiology, because we use a lot of these words and there's lots of different styles, and N.O.T is one. What is N.O.T specifically?
N.O.T is a modality that basically puts a whole heap of modalities together. So it eventuated from a gentleman by the name of Carl Ferrari, and he taught Bernard. So Bernard was taught first person by Carl Ferrari. He was a chiropractor over in America, and through his own investigations, he actually saw that he could actually fix dyslexia. Well, not that we can fix anything because we're not allowed to say that word. But he actually was successful in helping people with dyslexia to actually have less dyslexia. And in the process of him doing that, he showed his colleagues in the chiropractic field, which at that time, if you were working on the torso, you could work on the torso. If you were working on the arms, you could work on the arms. You weren't allowed to do the whole body at that stage, according to Carl. And his association actually fined him for doing that. And so he decided to go out there and find people who were interested in learning kinesiology and doing it the other way. So it's come from a chiropractic base, but it goes into emotions and goes into, look, there's all sorts of things in the kinesiology. You name the modalities, it's all in there in the N.O.T. So the neural organization technique is how to help the brain to actually help the rest of the body, basically. Get the body out of fight flight. That's the very first thing we do. Everyone that comes here, the first thing I do is get their body out of fight flight. That can take 2 minutes, it can take an hour. It depends on how far into the fight flight they are. But that's the first part. And then it's basically taking the body out of the survival mode. So a body, when it gets into fight flight, becomes only interested in survival. Things aren't going to work as well as they can. The brain's not going to work. Other areas aren't going to work as well because the body only needs to survive. So then we go through all different types of things. We go through, there's the endocrine system, the limbic system, and, there's, learning difficulties. There's a whole gambit of things that go into under that there. But saying that, I don't think you would find one N.O.T practitioner that works the same as the other. And I don't think you'd find that in most kinesiologies, actually.
True.
Because we all adapt it to our own style. And the style of N.O.T, like a lot of people have learned N.O.T, but not a lot of people actually have it as their basis, whereas I do. That's where I go back to, and I put everything through the N.O.T because it actually works really fast. So we often get faster results than some of the other ones. So, yeah, look, I love N.O.T, and once I learned it, or once I started going to Bernard, he said to me, "What do you want out of N.O.T?" And I said, "I want to be better than you." But I said, I feel like I've come home. I feel like this is what I'm meant to do in my world, and that's why I've had such a passion for it and run with it. But it is a case of putting protocols together and getting the body back into where it's supposed to be, which all kinesiology is. But we do a lot of structural as well. But we don't manipulate with structure. It's more about using acupressure points to program the body to actually release things.
Fabulous. And so where do the primitive reflexes, like, it sounds like they've become something that you're particularly passionate about, particularly with children. They're wonderful, the primitive reflexes, with all sorts of things, right down to even babies having colicky kind of symptoms and regurgitation. And I know I've worked with many children with those sorts of things, and even worked alongside some chiropractors at one stage, and they had so many little babies coming in, and some of those wonderful reflex work that they would do. That's so amazing.
Valves are essential to do with the babies with the colic and stuff like that.
Oh, so incredible.
So that's
great.
So yeah.
That's right. So for you, how do those primitive reflexes show up for you, and why are they important, do you think?
Well, look, you've got children that are out there and a lot of parents will know this, you've got children that are reactive. So it's not like they want to go out and be naughty. It's not like they decide, okay, now I'm going to actually go out and be naughty. It's a reaction that they do, and often afterwards they're very, very sorry of what they've done and don't realise why they actually did it. And it's that reactive nature that the primitive reflexes are very much about. So they don't mean to do it. They don't want to be naughty. They just can't help it, and they do it before they even realise they're doing it. So, and where they come from is they come from natural things that our body is supposed to actually work through, and it should integrate along the way. But sometimes we get environmental is a huge factor in it, but environmental factors that stop those reflexes from integrating and then being able to move on to the next one. The one thing that I'm very, very pedantic about with primitive reflexes is they have to be integrated in the order that they should be integrated in the body.
Right.
And if you do, for instance, a moro before you do a fear, you can actually cause extra stuff to come up. You might end up with a child that's not very happy for a while.
So what you mean by that is like in the order that they would naturally come on board or integrate into the system, right? Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense.
So
go ahead.
Yeah, so you have to do the fear paralysis first. It's as simple as that.
Yes.
So yeah, it should be integrated at birth. And this is your run and hide or stand and fight, but with no reasoning skills type of reflex. Yeah. So it'll be the kids that are really reactive. They're yelling. They don't know why they're doing it. They're saying all these things, and they're very sorry for it afterwards. From a clinical point of view, it's very much to do with acetylcholine, which is a hormone in the body and a neurotransmitter. and we have to get that working. It's also very, very involved with the vagus nerve. So getting the vagus nerve working is essential to getting the fear paralysis working. And you will find that the kids are very run and hide or stand and fight with this particular reflex. And once you get it integrated, they start calming down, and then you can go on to the Moro reflex. So the Moro reflex is your panic and anxiety reflex. So this is for all your panicky type kids. Now, there's a few things about the Moro. Often there's a bit of separation, anxiety. There's a lot of different things, but it is very related to panic and anxiety, and it's all about noradrenaline, which is, again, another hormone neurotransmitter.
Yep.
And if you've got a Moro reflex, one thing I always warn the parents is your Moro reflex is very related to the terrible twos. If your reflex hasn't integrated, if your Moro reflex hasn't integrated, you typically won't get the terrible twos.
Right.
So if you've not got the terrible twos, guess what's going to happen when you integrate the Moro reflex? You're going to get the terrible twos. It's usually for a short time, but I have to warn parents that that's quite normal. The other thing that I find is really, really interesting, and I don't really understand why, is a lot of mothers, when you're integrating the Moro reflex, just burst into tears.
Yes.
So it's just something that happens. I don't quite understand that one, but it happens regularly enough that when it happens, I go, yep, okay, that's fine. And I do warn mums, if you start feeling like you need to sit down and cry, put on a soppy movie, grab a box of tissues and go for it.
You mean when you're balancing the child's Moro reflex?
Yes.
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 It's interesting. Sadly, I can't give the exact article or who the research was through. You may have seen it yourself, where recently they're starting to understand a little bit that mother-child. I mean, obviously the mother-child connection is incredible, considering you carried that human being inside your own body for all that time and all that kind of thing. But there's actual research where they're talking about cells that are there with the fetus while they're growing, are actually shared into the mother's bloodstream and up into their parts of their brain. And even after the child is born, for many, many, many years after that, those particular cells remain within the structure of the mother's brain and whatnot. And so they're starting to hypothesize, well, is this, one other part of, like, almost like little antennas or something that connect the child and the parent in that way. So almost we've always known there's a beautiful connection and understand it, but they're starting to see that, wow, biochemically there is a very strong actual connection. So,
well, the thing is, as well, I only just did this the other day. I've been seeing this little boy who has the spinal gland, which we'll go into next, and very strong. So he's obviously still had the fear and the Moro that we've had to integrate, and we're still through those. I get to a point with the child that I have to say to the mother, "You're on the table now."
Yes.
Because the part of the child's healing at times is the relationship with the mother, and if they're reactive, it can take out of where their happy place. So, I just did that the other day, and the mum said, "Oh wow, I didn't even realise, but I now can see that my reactiveness was actually bringing him back out of his happy place." So, and as I said, the Moro reflex is all about that. It's about that subtle reflex. So the Moro reflex is when you take your baby to the clinic after it's born and they drop it to sleep, it goes like that. That's the subtle reflex, which is the Moro reflex, which is that retained. So they haven't integrated that particular thing, which then in turn the palmar reflex, the plantar reflex, both come in there. The next three are actually very intertwined. So the palmar, the plantar, and the spinal gland are very intertwined. They actually integrate in a similar time in the body. And the Moro reflex should be 3 to 6 months. It should be integrating, and that's they're rolling over and all of that sort of stuff. The spinal gland, however, which is one I see with a lot of kids, and I'll probably spend most of my time on that. There's a heap of other reflexes, but we're probably not going to get time to go through all of them today.
Yes.
But the spinal gland is a huge one. This is the kids that cannot sit still.
Right.
They, as soon as something's touching their back, their spine, they can't sit still. And it could be a clothing tag. It could be the teacher saying, now sit up and make sure your back's touching the back of the chair.
Right.
Anytime you touch their back, they cannot sit still. They become a wiggly worm. And
so that's the reflex that we test with a pen down the spine?
That is, yes. Yeah.
To see how they respond, yes.
Yeah. And if that's active, you will have separation anxiety. You can have bedwetting. There are all sorts of things that come out with the spinal gland, and it's all also very involved with GABA. So GABA is another neurotransmitter. So all of these have a neurotransmitter hormone connection.
Right.
And you've got to get the GABA right in the body. That's all a part of it to get it to hold. So it's not just let's do the correction. You've got to look at it from every different angle, nutritionally, emotionally. A lot of spinal glands, if there's emotions in the family, if there's somebody that yells, that will bring out the spinal gland. But it's all about walking as well, all about crawling actually. So it's the crawling one. And typically when you have a person that comes in with a very active spinal gland, they haven't crawled for long enough, or they haven't crawled correctly.
Right.
So they haven't crossed their midline properly, because crawling is all about crossing your midline and actually getting that going and getting the brain activated. And it's probably one that I find there's a whole heap of other. There's the ATNR, the STNR, which I can go through, but the spinal gland is probably the big one for behavioural kids that we need to actually get right. And I always say to parents, like parents will come in and go, oh, my baby's walking at 10 months. Like, I get down and crawl with him.
Yeah. It's such a good point, because I know our granddaughter, she's only just started walking, and it's funny how you have this kind of like, oh, are they walking yet? Are they walking yet? You think, why do we say that? Because really they need to crawl, they need to get that cross crawling in.
They have to. It's essential. And, with parents with this, I also will say to them now, particularly with the spinal gland, I say, hold their arm and make sure that they're crossing their midline to grab something.
Yes.
Crawl with them. Don't encourage them to walk until they're ready. They should crawl, for a minimum of 4 to 6 months, to be very honest, and it has to be on all fours. There's no commando crawling in there, and that basically acts the brain, gets it all working, and then you don't have the can't sit still kiddies, and it's very full on for a lot of children, and they get in trouble, and they don't like to get in trouble. That's another thing I go into, is auditory processing. I go into that a lot, and that seems to go hand in hand with the spinal gland. There's usually some auditory processing there with those.
So if you were to see, if someone was to come in, and I know for me, like I've had clients come in and say, oh, my baby boot scoots, booty scoots, like they're not crawling, they're actually just scooting along on their booty. So that would be, possibly an indicator that, or certainly that they need to get in and integrate that brain.
Well, they need to get in and integrate the brain, make sure they're crossing the midline. So make sure that when they're handing them something, hold this arm and make them reach across their body to get things. And that's all as well. But yeah, the other thing is I say get down and crawl with them, because they really need on all fours, and they need to see. It's like cross crawling. I mean, I'll get kids in here and I'll give them a little bit of homework with the brain gym and stuff to go home and do, because the cross crawling is really good for your brain. But I always say to the people, you'll start cross crawling to show them how to cross crawl, and they'll do a homolateral crawl. And they'll go, no, you're doing it wrong. I know, no, let them do it in the homolateral style until they notice that it's different, because the brain's not ready to integrate, and that's forcing it. So I always say to people, don't push it, keep showing them, keep doing it with them, and eventually they'll go, oh, I'm doing it wrong, and they'll start doing it the right way, and that's when you do it.
Right.
So I really, really, I like to make sure that the body's doing things as it needs to rather than, forcing it to, because forcing doesn't really work very well. So,
No, that's right. That's right. So are there maybe another reflex that you find comes up a little bit for kids?
oh, the plantar and the palmar. So that's your grip. That comes up a lot. The ST&R comes up a lot. I don't get many. There's a few that don't come up as regularly. The TNR, the TLR. So they're all tonic labyrinthine. So this is all structural, getting the things right. They have a lot of different things. It's probably too much to go into right now. But the most important ones are those first 5, which is the fear, the moro, spinal gland, palmar, and plantar, and then you get into the other ones. I have a lot of teenagers that I have to start getting into the ST&R, and that's when you actually need to get them on all fours and get them turning their head and doing all sorts of different things as well. The beauty with N.O.T. is it's actually given us a vice to cut through a few corners and actually do it a little bit faster as well. So I don't have to probably do as much of the physical part because I know where things are going on. So it's really good. But if you, I'll just read out to you because this is a list. The fear paralysis is all about acetylcholine. The moro is all about noradrenaline. The suck reflex, which is another one actually, when you get the kids that you'll touch the corner of their mouth and they probably didn't breastfeed right. That's actually a histamine issue.
Wow.
So these are all going through. There's a whole heap of different ones that you go through. The rooting reflex, which is actually related to the suck reflex, is also a histamine, but it's a low histamine. Your palmar is a low GABA. The plant is a high serotonin. So as you can see, all of these are neurotransmitters and hormones that are not working effectively in the body to allow these to integrate properly. I'll go through some of the side effects of not having the reflexes done for, I'll pick one. Let's go fear.
That'd be great.
Okay, so low tolerance to stress, panic disorders, dislike of change or surprise. So somebody that has a fear paralysis will often have that won't like changing. Feelings of overwhelm, excessive shyness, fear of being separated from loved ones, overly clingy. Now, if they had all of these, you'd probably be in a mental asylum. But what actually happens with a lot of these, the children will work through them gradually. What we're doing is we're just helping it happen a lot faster for the baby and helping it, it should have already been done. But they will actually come through and actually fix up a lot of this stuff themselves just through natural living. But we're just looking for those ones that haven't integrated. I'm just looking through the moro reflexes. I'll say to you, the spinal gland is probably the biggest one in the children with the learning difficulties and the behavioural. And it's probably the one that once you get that done, you can go through the others. The others typically aren't as hard as the spinal gland, but they'll come through as they need to come through. And, everybody's an individual, so everybody has different things that they're working through. Everybody has different challenges they need to take on, but getting those first few. The only other thing I've also noticed with these, and I do work slowly through these because I've actually found the body can't actually work with probably more than 2 reflexes per appointment.
Right.
I've had people that have said they went to get their reflexes done and they did them all in one appointment, and it never holds. So I find that if you're going to do them properly, the body usually won't let me do more than 2. It's rare that I'll get to. So usually, the first 2 appointments are just the fear and the moro. So and there's so much information. You need to ask me questions.
And even doing those too could literally transform somebody's life overnight.
Totally.
In massive ways. And so the ways that people might, the people come in with their children, and it could be things like concentration issue that starts to show up in school, because obviously we have a system where everyone's graded, and next thing, oh gee, Johnny can't, is having trouble with writing or having trouble with comprehension, or and a lot of those skills, comprehension, listening, reading, writing, all those kind of things are heavily connected to our reflexes.
Yeah.
And so that's when obviously we start to, the person might think, oh, Johnny's just having trouble with comprehension, but it's really something happening with a combination of maybe a trauma or even a food intolerance or something going on that's triggering something, or obviously that reflex has just never quite integrated with that person. And often you'll hear the parents say, oh, look, they've always kind of been a little bit like that, or they always, was a bit one-sided with things, or had trouble with one side of their body doing certain things. People will generally have noticed that they have funny little ways, and then it really starts to show up when you're in a classroom with a bunch of other children that are all meant to be achieving certain levels and all that kind of thing. And then you add the stress for the child of, I'm in class and I have to read out loud, and there could be some reflex associated to that, out of play, and next thing you add fear into it, and then the morrow could also be in play, and so you've got this double whammy of
what I've found is that typically those children that are in that situation, they do fall behind. I will say I actually had quite the opposite experience, where the school kept telling me, don't worry, she'll catch up. But right. To sit there and hear, trying to read, the cat sat on the mat and turning the page and she couldn't read it again, was devastating. She was in tears, I was in tears. There was obviously a problem there. And the school kept saying, don't worry, she'll catch up, she'll catch up. I will say that if I hadn't have stepped in, because I was the one that forced all of this, I pushed it all. And the funny thing was when I went through and found out that she had dyslexia, I went through and I said to my husband, these are all the things that she's dealing with. And he said, yeah, I've lived with it all my life. It usually comes from a parent.
There you go.
So here's a little chart about all the reflexes and how they integrate. And that's what I tend to follow.
Wow.
Not going to go through it right now, but I do go through and make sure that they're done as they're integrated, because otherwise I have seen people really messed up not doing them in the right order. So they have to be done as they integrate. But yeah, look, I'm so grateful to kinesiology, because it gave my daughter a lot of confidence and boosted her somewhat into now doing what she does, which she basically does, sound and lighting for theatre, which is she's like. So,
that's absolutely wonderful.
Yeah.
So you've been working for nearly 20 years now, and you did most of your study. I mean, what a privilege to do a lot of your study with Bernard Carsen. So
yes.
What about Bernard and the way that he worked did you love? You can look up about Bernard, and does he still actually work? Is he still working?
He called me, he's 91 now, and he called me about 3 months ago and said, I'm just going to send some of my clients to you because I can't see them anymore. He's struggling now. He has been up until this, like last year.
Which is, I mean, I don't know many sort of, I guess, work types where you still hear people still working, continuing to work. I know so many kinesiologists who in their 80s and 90s, and they're still with clients, and you just think, and that shows you the passion that they sort of just think, well, why would I stop doing this? Like, it's not like you ever retire.
Yeah, I go on holidays, and I rarely get away on holidays without working on somebody somewhere.
Yeah.
Because you see something and you know that you can do something to help it. And I think it's probably a bit nasty to actually not offer to help if you can help. I do put a lot of focus on nutrition with the kids that I work with in particular, and with the adults, to be very honest, because if you've got toxins going in, it makes it 10 times harder. And I always say to my parents with the learning difficulty kids, 60% of what I have to actually get through here is to get their nutrition right. Once we've got the nutrition right, we've got a good basis to get everything else working. So I do often start with, let's go through the meal plan. Let's go through what they don't eat. I was fortunate enough to, here's a whole another thing. I was fortunate enough to work with another lady who is a good friend of mine, who's a genetic counsellor. And she's actually taught me all about the MTHFR gene. And
right, I was just going to say.
Yeah, all of that sort of stuff. So I've gone through a huge learning process with that and helping people with finding out what their body should have and shouldn't have. And, you know, there's all different things. The pyrroles, that all comes into, I don't know whether you've worked much with pyrroles.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of kids that if they've got the pyrroles running, well, you know, they've got B6 and zinc deficiency amongst other things, and they're not going to function properly. So
that's right.
It's a whole person. It always has been, it always will be. The primitive reflexes are a huge part of children particularly, but as I said, I've had many adults here with lots of primitive reflexes, and I always check them anyway. But typically it's getting that learning happening, getting the child able to focus and concentrate, able to sit still in class because they can't. I mean, I had a little boy here yesterday who's got a very active spinal gland, and we're still working on the morrow. We haven't even got to the spinal gland yet, but you can see that what I'm doing is really aggravating. He couldn't sit still, and his dad said, I've never seen him so wiggly. I said, that's okay. I'm actually aggravating the system right now because I actually need to find out what's going on with it. So I said, he's going to be wiggly. That's okay. Just let him be. And he went, oh, okay, that's okay then, because he said, I've never seen him quite so wiggly. I said, yeah, well, I'm aggravating it because I'm trying to actually help it to integrate. And in the integration of it, at times I always warn people for 24 hours, they can be a little bit worse because the body has to start working on it. So
that's right.
It's fascinating, and it's something I never thought I'd be doing. But I will tell you this is quite funny. I went to a psychic in my early 20s. I was living up at the Gold Coast, and she told me that I would move to a larger city, remarry, have 2 children, and be a healer. And I told her she was crazy. So
that's incredible. And that was when you were still working.
I was 22 in Queensland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, working corporate. So
incredible. Just one of those things that it ends up calling you, I think, in the end, this type of thing.
Yeah, look, I think that there were opportunities for me to introduce myself to kinesiology before with my older daughter, but I didn't believe in it, and I didn't think that it could make the changes that I needed, so I just wrote it off without even looking at it. I should have actually looked at it then, and then I probably would have been in it, 10 years earlier. So
yeah. That's right. And I mean, when you think about it, it's only been probably in the last maybe 4 or 5 years that even I've noticed it start to become a little bit more mainstream. Even though it's nowhere near mainstream, it's starting to, people know what a kinesiologist is. A lot of people have a kinesiologist or are taking their children to one. So it's starting to integrate into something that people have faith in and having more understanding around how powerful it can be. So it's
well, and as I say to people, we don't fix or heal anything.
No.
All we're doing is helping their body to do what it's supposed to do in the first place. And it's not a case of, we can cure anything. We don't cure anything. We just help the body work the way it's supposed to.
That's right. And it's a good point to remind people, all of these conversations that we have, sometimes we talk about various things that people are experiencing or symptoms that they're experiencing. And yes, we work with people who come into clinic with them. They might have MTHFR happening, or they might have some, migraines happening. We don't go in with, obviously, we want to make a difference to the person and their experience of that symptom, but we're working on what's underneath that symptom, not the actual illness, the disease itself. We're not here to diagnose or treat those things at all. We're here to have a look underneath, what could be the causative factors, what may be out of alignment in the system, what emotional traumas may be at play, all sorts of things that are there, and just trying to join the dots for the body, having the body go, oh yes, that and that's connected. And often as soon as the body makes that connection as to what's happening, very quickly, even I'm sure you've experienced, without even any technique, people are shifting as the body starts to line up to the little cues as to what's connected to what. And next thing you know, you think, oh gosh, I barely feel like I have to do anything more now that the person will have the shift on the table themselves, whether it be through maybe tears or laughter or all sorts of manner of expressions on the table, which I'm sure you've seen them all.
And I've had people in here that have just laughed continuously and walked out the door and get up. But yeah, look, it's something that people need to be open to. It actually is quite scientific. People go, it's a little bit hocus pocus. It's actually not. It's actually quite scientific. And if you want to go through, I've got all the manuals here to go through, the science behind how it all. And it is quite a scientific type thing. It's just not something that we don't diagnose, we don't heal, we just help the body to work the best it can.
That's right. And most people who have been, particularly people like yourself who've been in kinesiology for 20 years, anyone who thinks that that doesn't have an art or a science to it, I mean, the amount of training that we have to do, the understanding of the body, the anatomy and physiology, as you said, we have to, as part of our practitioner status and the ability to work in the industry, that there are requirements for us to understand the body on that scientific level. And we're constantly, if I could, I can't even, it'd take me an hour to go through the amount of coursework that I've done in everything from understanding homeopathy to understanding, the reflexes, essences, hormones, women's issues, men's issues, muscular issues, specializations in massage for lymphatic systems, understanding lymphatic systems, how they work, the emotions that connect to affecting those systems. Even, there's other kinesiologists that work on, other spiritual issues, outside of the mental emotional. There's also all of that as well. Sometimes there's lots of people that focus on spiritual kinesiology or energetic kinesiology or kinesiopathy. There's so many different ways of expressing what we do, and the training that we have to actually go through to be able to bring all of those things together on, in one session.
Yeah, it's
quite incredible, really.
Well, I remember with my anatomy and physiology teacher, he actually said that currently when I was doing it, that it actually had been made an elective for doctors, and we have to do more anatomy and physiology than a doctor has to do.
Wow. That's quite incredible. Well, yes, that's extraordinary. And you find that, someone will become, I have a qualification in neuro-linguistic kinesiology, so applying neuro-linguistic programming inside of kinesiology, then went on to do the whole training modality of neurotraining, and maybe 30-something workshops. All of those workshops are at least 4 or 5 days, massive amounts of hours of practice, and then moving into another style called Resolve, which is another level of coming at kinesiology in a slightly different way. And then on top of that, you look at all these other little modalities like muscle release stuff, people for whiplash, whole two-day weekends on how to help people with whiplash and understanding the muscular system and what happens within the nervous system when whiplash happens to people. And so the coursework is just endless for us, and that thirst for understanding the human being more. I don't know about you, but I find I don't think I'll ever stop learning. And
I learn something single day with that, like usually.
Exactly. Exactly. And I think I learn something with every single client because they're all so different, and we're not necessarily governing where the sessions are going. even a client I had this morning, she has pain, which is associated with the diagnosis of fibromyalgia. That's not what I'm necessarily working on, but interestingly, she's looking at having tests done around the connection between MTHFR and fibromyalgia. And actually, when I went and looked at the research after the session, there is a huge connection between the two. And so I think often, you're in session and two things come up and you think, oh, they're side by side. You think, how do they relate? And you think, oh my gosh, they actually do relate. And so she's going off to have further testing done with her doctor to identify, is this going on? And I'll find it very interesting to see if what the session revealed that could be in play is in play. So,
look, it is very good. And there's a lot of good doctors that you can work with out there. I've had quite a few, there's a lot of doctors that don't want to know about us, but there's a lot of doctors who are actually open to finding things. There's a paediatrician that I've done a lot of work with his clients here, and he actually said to one of my clients, thank goodness for Judy, I never would have found that if she hadn't have found it. So, and then he can work with it. So he'll take my findings and actually work with them as well, which has really helped our clients. So,
it's a lovely integrative way of working, and it's beautiful that, because we're here to say, modern medicine, there's so much that we need from each other to, obviously I'm no surgeon, and there are certain tests and things that help us to understand what's happening for our body. So it's wonderful to dovetail and work together for the greater good of the person.
I'd love to.
It would be wonderful, wouldn't it? So if people would love to have a session with you, Jude, whereabouts are you? And where is your clinic and how can they contact you?
So I work from my home on the Northern Beaches at French's Forest, and basically give me a call on my phone number, which is 0410 696 570, and we can discuss what we need to do.
Wonderful. Do you have any other sort of online presence? Do you have email? Do you have Facebook page where people can grab you?
Oh, look, I do. I'm not a big techie person. I do have a Facebook page, but I don't do much with it. I've got a natural therapy pages, which is quite basic, which you can read some testimonials and stuff from other people on. I do need to update it. My daughter's going to do all that for me.
No, that's fine.
I'm not a big tech type person, and natural therapy pages ring me and say you've got to upgrade everything, and I really keep it there because people get referred to me. I've basically focused my whole business on referrals.
Absolutely.
And if people are referred to me, I just want something for them to go and read. Natural therapy says, oh, but we'll get you more clients. I go, no, you're there as something for people to read if they've been referred to me. And that's
a signpost. Look, and that's the sign of an extraordinary practitioner when, I know for myself and many other of us, we don't really do a heck of a lot of advertising, so to speak, and yet the most clients that I find come to is always you see someone and the next thing you spend the next few months seeing their family and friends and someone else who they've said you just need to go and see this person. Very rare, you will get from time to time someone that's landed there through the natural therapy pages, because it is a great place for people. I'm looking for someone who's around in this area, and they find you. So it's really great. So you can find Judy Weaver on natural therapy pages there with her details and whatnot. If you need to look her up in French's Forest, which is Northern Beaches, for all of you lucky people over the Northern Beaches, if you'd like to see Jude. But yeah, that's right. So is there anything else that you wish to share with anyone about the way you work before we finish up, Jude?
Look, there's a whole heap of stuff probably, but everybody's so individual. I work on priority of what the body wants to do, how it wants to heal, and I just go with every session is different. I can never predict what a session's going to be because I very much work with the person that's in front of me, and it's very individual.
And so even though we have chatted quite a bit about reflexes in children today, Jude works with all gamuts of people from all ages. Obviously, children and those reflexes are a passion, but if you're someone who's dealing with anything really, even if it's you know, you wanting to expand your business. Like I'm sure that's, you know, Judy's there to help you look at where there might be ceilings or boundaries or you know, something in play that's preventing you from growing in a certain area of your life. So it's not just what we've spoken about today. And it might be fun in a couple of months' time, Jude, if people are interested, we could actually maybe have another chat specifically about the reflexes and go into a bit more depth about each reflex and what's involved and you know, ways that people might be able to make it.
Talk to you for an hour on each one, to be very honest. So
oh, that's fantastic.
That's why
well, that would be great
to give an overview. But I think the thing to take home is that they have to be done in order of integration.
Yes.
So yeah.
And we're also, Jude and I are also talking about the possibility maybe of trying to have a chat with Bernard sometime. We'll see if we can pull that off, to be able to speak to such a grandfather in our amazing craft, someone with all of his years of knowledge. I've got so many clients who came to see me but originally had been seeing Bernard and then they might have moved, or you know, it's just too far to go for them, whatever, and suddenly they think, oh, they've got a kinesiologist close by, but they all just spoke so highly of Bernard. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we can have a chat with him sometime as well. But I just, if you're interested, those of you who are watching, if you are interested in seeing a little bit more about the reflexes, they are fascinating. Learning a bit more about how they might be able to help you with certain areas of your life, and particularly your children, what you might notice in their behaviours and ways that you can assist them. Jude and I will have another chat in a couple of months or a month or so, and maybe go into more depth about that. That could be some fun.
Yeah, look, as I said, I can go into each of the reflexes in quite just. I think I saw today more as an overview of just.
Yes, brilliant, exactly. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on today, Judy. I cannot tell you how grateful I am, considering you've been so busy and had so much happening, that you've made the time to see us today. It's been wonderful. So I really look forward to chatting with you again soon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Angela.
My deep pleasure. Thank you.